Hello, and welcome to another episode of Game, Develop, Repeat, the podcast where we talk about a game that I enjoy, what makes it special, and what we as game developers can learn from it. I'm your host, Chris, a music educator turned indie game developer, and today's episode is all about Dragon Quest XI Echoes of an Elusive Age. In this episode, we discuss unrelenting optimism, making players care about the game world, well refined turn based combat, and respecting the player's time. Let's get to it. Dragon Quest XI Echoes of an Elusive Age manages to do something that I didn't expect it to be able to do, and that is it manages to be unrelentingly optimistic and have like a very cozy vibe while also having a high stakes story and a feeling that everything does matter. And it manages to do all this. This is the incredible part to me, without bothering me. My concern with a game that is so optimistic and so cheerful and like has like woohoo power of friendship stuff is that I'm sorry to like be like that way about it, but sometimes that stuff gets under my skin. Sometimes I'm like, okay, yeah, I've watched the anime, I get it, like power of friendship. All right, cool, let's go, let's move on. My feeling going into this was, oh, it's probably going to be that kind of thing, and maybe it's going to get under my skin and it's going to annoy me. I was resistant to this game when I first decided to play it. I was like, all right, I've heard such good things. It does look good. It's got this cool crafting thing. I need to open my mind a little bit. I need to try this game. Man, am I glad I tried this game. This is exactly the JRPG that I've been looking for a long time. Over the years, I've been playing Final Fantasy games, which are good, and I like them, for a lot of good reasons. The more recent ones are not doing the stuff that I loved in the old school ones. This Dragon Quest game does old school JRPG combat the way that I want it to be. It gets rid of a lot of the grind. It gets rid of a lot of the frustrations, and it gives you this combat system where each character's actions feel impactful. Each turn feels like it has stakes. It feels like you have to actually make decisions, and it's still very easy though, which is fascinating. It keeps the combat easy. The combat is beautifully animated with incredible art, and there are enemies that I fought where I felt guilty after I killed them, and I I still don't feel good about it. Just playing those animations back through my head, I'm like, oh man, I didn't have to do that. I could have run away. Like what? Come on, man. Like there are there are things in this game that just make you feel like you gotta respect the world around you with this beautiful art style because everything's so friggin' cute. And I'm not normally into this art style. I'm not very familiar with it. I didn't grow up with it. I didn't watch a lot of like Dragon Ball Z. Um, so I'm not used to this kind of art really, which I think maybe caused it to have a greater impact on me, perhaps. But it is very, very stylized, very beautiful. I expect it to age really well over the years, as highly stylized art usually does. Um, let's talk a little bit more about how it's avoiding being grindy. This is one of those JRPGs where you can dodge around the enemies, right? Nobody really does the like full on random encounters anymore in the AAA space, I guess. I'm trying to think of any. I mean, I'm sure it's probably around, but I can't think of one off the top of my head. A AAA game that does the random encounters in the old school way. Um, Maybe on a mobile device, but it does do the thing where you can see the enemy, you can dodge around them, or you can choose to fight them. You can get some idea of what battle you're getting into. You can do like the preemptive attack thing, which is nice. And the way the game is balanced, you can kind of dodge through a lot of enemies and just avoid fighting them for good chunks of the game and not end up feeling underpowered, which is extremely pleasant. I really appreciate that because, just, these games are long. They don't need to be, even longer with it. There's a lot of stuff in the world to just explore and pick up. So, you get to really feel like you are exploring the world on another level, because sometimes you can like ride enemies to jump up things or to fly around, which is really nice. Adds another layer to it. Um, and let's talk about the combat itself a tiny bit more. So the abilities that your characters use, they do feel unique to the characters. It feels like each character has their own unique style, and the way that you can pop characters in and out of battle is nice. It reminds me a little bit of Final Fantasy X, um, although definitely slightly different from that. And I like the fact that I can use all my characters within one battle. That is pretty good, and I think that's probably a standard feature for this kind of turn-based combat these days. Um, man, okay, so how do I explain these abilities? Certain characters, even between like two different like kind of healery characters, it feels like they get a little bit more specialized in their own abilities, and you can specialize sort of through weapon selection. So there's a lot going on there, but it doesn't feel overwhelming. It's not something where you have to dig deep, 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 deep into the game to understand all the mechanics. It's an extremely casual experience. You can just play it, have some fun. You get to do some customization, but you don't have to like pull out the spreadsheets. And your customization feels like it has an impact, even if you don't pull out the spreadsheets, which is really nice. Let's okay, so the optimism stuff. I'm trying to find a way to talk about how optimistic this game is without giving a bunch of spoilers. Um, One of the key components of the optimism in this game is definitely the way that you travel around the world and have an impact on the people around you. There is a feeling of genuine gratitude from the people who you do quests for, and it's not the in one instant kind of gratitude. There's something about it that feels more impactful than a game where they just go, "Oh, thank you, whatever." There's like there's a little charm tucked in there. There's a little bit of real impact that it feels like you're having based on more than just a one sentence of dialogue between the characters. And I'm not sure why that is, because it's not like they have these wild repercussions that are echoing through every single quest that you do. I think it's more the overall structure of the story and the way that they structure the dialogue and the little cinematics and things that make it feel like everybody really cares what's going on in this world. And when something good happens, it really affects them. And when something bad happens, it really affects them. And somehow through that, when a bunch of really bad stuff happens and a bunch of really good stuff happens, the good ends up outweighing the bad within this story, because they are genuinely acknowledging how good the good things are, in addition to acknowledging how bad the bad things are. Um, and there's something about that makes it optimistic, even though bad stuff is happening. And if we're honest, the art style makes it really optimistic. I think I've already said that though. Let's talk about voice acting. I haven't even gone on my whole thing about voice acting before. I do talk about it on occasion. You know that I love a good goofy voice acting. Um, and sometimes voice acting is not that great. Here's how I feel about the voice acting in Dragon Quest XI. I love it. It is also very goofy, and I don't love it because it's bad, which is often the case when I call voice acting goofy. You know, like some old school stuff. There's some old voice acting that is hysterical, and no shade to those people, but they've given me some of the best laughs of my life. Um, but this game has intentionally goofy voice acting, intentionally over the top, ridiculous moments with these wild accents and stuff, and I am not mad at it. I actually switched over from the Japanese to the English just to hear the voice acting, because I like the English voice acting that much, even though it's quite goofy and bizarre. I think it's very well acted. So yeah, there's just a lot of, I think the big picture with this one is there's a lot of small things that are coming together into this one cohesive world. And it seems like the team that built this game worked together really well to create a optimistic world that feels comfortable to kind of reside in while you're playing the game. Oh, crafting system. I love a good crafting system. There is a nice, simple mini game for their crafting in this game that is not too intense, but is satisfying. I think that's a perfect spot for a crafting system to be. If you're terrible at it, it doesn't matter. But if you're good at it, you feel rewarded. You feel like, oh, hey, look, I figured out how to do this and I got a little reward for it. Love it. Side quests, great. Every side quest has character behind it. Everything has some degree of interest to it. Oh, I haven't even talked about one of the biggest things in this game. How have I missed this? You can play this game in either 2D or 3D mode. You can just switch over. You can just be like, you know what? I'm feeling old school. Let's change my save file to a 2D save file. Let's just change this to a top-down old school, like really old school JRPG. And that's amazing. I don't know I don't know what they did to make the game have that capability. I don't know what absolute technical genius is behind this, but my God, am I astounded that a company went out of their way to give you the ability to play their entire game in both 2D and 3D, like 2D with charming pixel art, or the full 3D with its own charming art. That is so above and beyond that I don't even have words for it. And you bet that was a selling point for me on this game. I didn't even use the 2D mode much. I just popped into it and went, oh, that's really cool. And then I went back to 3D, but it was there if I wanted it. And I love that. I think that is so over the top. And you know what? That's most of this game is so over the top, but it's executed correctly. And there's nothing like a well executed cheesy JRPG. It's really hard to do, but man, they knocked it out of the park with this one. I did play it on PC. It's also on Switch. Here comes the real challenge. All right, the real challenge is figuring out what I can take away from this, because so much of this game is coming from this place of, wow, that's incredibly well put together by a giant team. Wow, that art is really well crafted by a man who is regarded as one of the greatest artists of the time. Like, wow, that voice acting is done really well by these people who are incredible voice actors. So that's the next question. And this is the important one. What can we take away from this game as, in my case, a solo indie game developer or as a small dev team? I don't know your situation. Uh, but even as somebody who's just trying to learn something about game dev, maybe you're just in one of these specific fields and you're like, oh, I'd like to learn a bit more about the art. Let's see what we can figure out here, because I think I'm going to have to dive deep on this one to find things that are genuinely applicable to my situation, just because the game is such a broad scale. I say that, watch, I'm going to come back to you after this little musical break and I'm going to have too many questions, and it'll be great, and we'll have plenty of stuff to chew on and digest. Let's get to those questions. Turns out I do have a few questions that I was able to come up with. So the first one here is, how can I get players to care about the game world? My thought process here is that there's a ton of different angles to get a player to care about the game world. There are so many different ways you can do it that it gets a little overwhelming. So let's just narrow it down and say, hey, what are my skills? How can I do this in my games, right? Um, Ooh, you know what's a good old school JRPG trick is just the music. You can just make the music so impactful that you end up caring about it. Like I don't think this is the most direct connection to it, but you can absolutely make the music so good that it makes you care about the music or care about the world more. If that's not your skill, you can do this with your sound design. We've talked about how like a horror game will have a really compelling sound design that makes you terrified of everything around you. You can make somebody care about everything. You can have these cute little like bird sounds in the background. You can have sound effects that happen whenever some tragedy strikes. You can have all this stuff that ties into the world, and then you don't have to do all the graphical work on it. If sound design is more your skill, if you're better with art, you can make a very stylized form of art. You don't have to go in hard on high graphical fidelity if that's not your thing. If you're not that good at art, you can lean heavier on other things the what was the word I was just looking for? It's like the characterization of the world. You can lean heavily on other things for making people invested in the world. You can put a lot of lore in there in like subtle ways, though. I'm big on the subtle lore. I don't like the huge book of lore. I like the little bits of lore tucked throughout the world. I like the notes scrawled on the back of a napkin. I like the things that make you ask questions, because if you can just make them ask questions, then they think that there's so much more going on than there is. That's my theory, but I think one of the things you run into is like the more questions you set up, the more people can like fill in the gaps, and then it's like, oh wait, did they actually think through what was going on behind this or not? So that can kind of break the illusion, I guess. That's something I want to play with later. At some point, I want to make a game that has um, a lot of lore and a lot to the world. There's a specific project that I'm not going to talk exactly about what it is, but there is a specific project that I want to do probably years down the line. I don't think I'm going to have the skills for it for a while. It's actually what got me started on this whole thing. There's just this one project I really want to make. Um and it's going to be a bit before I'm skilled enough to tackle it. But uh in that, I do want to explore the world building a lot more. So that's one of my big curiosities here. Um and within that concept, I think just putting little things throughout the world for people to explore, that'll get them curious. And then the way that Dragon Quest does it is they just make things so cute that you can't help but care about them. They make they make it so easy to get invested in this world because some of the enemies are adorable, right? And you're like, "Oh, it's so cute." I can't help but love it, and now I have to fight it. And there's stuff plot wise that you can do. And ooh, okay, here's one that I'm thinking about: game mechanics to get you to care. I know I'm just listing things off here, but hopefully it's helpful to somebody to get yourself to care about the world in a platformer. If you have the world itself have significant impacts on your character, that's a way of making you care about the world. You can get the player to go, I hate that obstacle. I love that save point. I'm very invested in this, that, the other. It doesn't even have to be that visually appealing. It can just have a strong enough emotional impact to make the player very invested. And maybe your checkpoint is like a little dude that talks to you, and you're like, oh, thank God, I finally met up with like I don't know, Johnny the Jelly Bean who helps me save my game. At last, I was so terrified that I wasn't gonna get to talk to the Jelly Bean. I know I'm cut me some slack on the examples that I'm coming up with today. This is the third episode I've recorded in like 12 hours. All right, let's go to the next question because I think I've beaten that one to death. The next question is, what can I learn about respecting the player's time from this game? Respecting time. What an appropriate moment for that to come up right after I went in so hard on that one question. I'm thinking the big takeaway was this game respects the player's time by giving you options. It creates the opportunity to grind if you want to, but it makes it so that not grinding is a viable option. It's just a matter of balance, and presenting options to the player. I don't know what's going on under the hood there. I don't know how they do their level scaling. I don't know if that's part of what's involved in it. I know that's a common tool for this sort of thing. But whatever it is that they did, it gave me the feeling of, if I skip stuff, I am fine. If I grind, I will get more powerful, and that is also fine. But I don't feel like grinding, so I'm just going to skip stuff. And it didn't punish me aggressively for not burning hours and hours fighting one or two enemies, but then it does give you these challenge goals that you can pursue if you want to. I think the real catch is making sure that those challenge goals don't feel like things that you have to do. Because when it feels like something you have to do, then suddenly, like, you're already invested in the game, and now you're not going to have a good time. Because now you're grinding because you have to, and that's frustrating. That's not a great place to be in. As far as a platformer, which is what I'm working on, I think that respecting the player's time means knowing where they're going to die and setting it up so that they can get back to that pretty quickly. Or if you're going for the other angle, if you're going for this frustrating thing, just know where the points are where you're intentionally frustrating the player. Because that I guess that's a delicate balance too, but that is also a very real thing and a very real strategy for designing a game. Um, yeah, I'm a big fan of, like, if you're gonna do that, here's my thought: the really long screen. I've already talked about this like 2 or 3 episodes ago. The really long screen of like a respawn that takes forever to start back up. Not great. Not a big fan. This is why I love Super Hexagon, which I need to add to the list. Yeah, I 100% need to add Super Hexagon to the list of things to cover on this show. But Super Hexagon is so quick to restart, and it is one of my favorite things. It's you just jump straight back into the gameplay loop. So that's one way of respecting time as well. What about just like in a different genre? I'm gonna go too far off the rails. But I think there's a different version of this in every genre, and it's very important in an RPG or JRPG, in my opinion, because those are long games. And yes, you can look at it and go, oh, this game is like 100 and whatever number of hours. So it doesn't matter if it's an extra 10 minutes here and there. I think it makes it matter more. I think it puts you in this situation where, like, if you're not enjoying all of that time, why are you playing it at all? It's easier for a player to hit this point where they go, oh, there's just too much of this thing. Like the load screens for battles, and I'm so sorry to do this, but the load screens for battles in Final Fantasy IX are a travesty. I love that game to death. I've beaten it like 2 times. I love it. It's so but oh my god, every time you enter a battle in that game, you have time to go like make a cup of tea and then come back, and then you start the battle, and you hit one button and it ends the battle, and it does the whole outro thing, and you have time to like drink your cup of tea, and then you're back on the world map, right? That's no good. So that's the kind of thing where I think it's really important. One of my buddies was like, I quit playing that game because it takes so long to load into the battles. And ever since he told me that, I can't unsee it. And I apologize if I just caused that moment for you, but it is a problem. It's not okay how long it takes to get into those battles. I think it's important to look for little things like that where you're like, oh, this adds a lot of style to my game. But then how many times is the player going to experience that style? Are they going to enjoy it once and then hate it 7,000 times? Because if that's the case, then maybe it's not worth the one time that they're going to enjoy it. Um, I have to think about that in my own game. I'm the jumping is just like a tiny bit slower than I want it to be, and I'm wondering if I need to find a way to speed it up. I'm seeing if I get more feedback on that from other people. But I do wonder if it's worthwhile to make the movement just a little more snappy. All right, 2 more questions. Let's rip through them real quick. When are cliches good or bad? I think that this game does a lot of cliche stuff, Dragon Quest that is, and I think that it pulls it off. I think like the save the world cliche, all this stuff, right? They put like a little twist on it, and then it's good. I think the key with something like this is really understanding the cliche to its core and giving it the giving it an angle of approach that makes it interesting and not literally just a cliche. Like, I guess what I'm saying is somebody can quote a cliche to you just because it's like a thing that they've heard their whole life and they just go, oh, okay, I'm just going to say this thing that everybody says, right? Or they can have a deep understanding of the meaning behind it and they can elaborate on that rather than just say the one sentence to you, right? Um, this metaphor is getting away from me a little bit, but my point is, if a game is using something very cliche, if they're using a very cliche story, it can't just be that they just slapped that on because it's what everybody does. Yeah, I think you've got to think through why you're doing that story, what is involved in that story, and if it's really the right story for you and the right story for your game, and if it really is going to have the impact that you want it to have. Last question. What old ideas can be tapped into for a new title? This is a massive question. And I'm not going to do it full justice because there's no way that I possibly can. And my voice is getting a little tired. So, what old ideas can be tapped into? So, I think this is one of those things. This is actually one of those reasons that I do this podcast. I do this podcast partially because I want to look at these old games and see what ideas are tucked away in there and see what I can mine from all these games and see where I can draw inspiration because that's going to be important for future projects. And I guess the real takeaway from this question is you can take an idea from any old game and give it a twist. You can take an idea from any new game and give it a twist. As far as I know, and I'm not a lawyer, you can't copyright game mechanics. So you can take those game mechanics and you can twist them up. You can do cool new things with them. You can mix them together. And it's really just a matter of which ones you like and which ones you're inspired by and what you want to do with them. So I don't have a specific answer to this because there's just too many options, and I literally can't like find my place in the field of different game mechanics that have existed over the history of gaming. But this concept that you can take any idea and mess with it and mix it up a little bit and find a new direction with it, I think is very freeing and extremely powerful. And it's nice to see that. We've seen it over and over and over again. We've seen that situation where somebody or a company takes an old school mechanic or takes a couple newer mechanics and blends them together and makes something beautiful out of it. Let's go ahead and move on and go to this week's tip. This week's tip is very simple. It's actually just to embrace some of that good old Dragon Quest optimism. I'm a fan of, I guess, realistic optimism. So looking at what's going on and genuinely embracing the positive things that are happening and the positive impact. And whenever you find yourself framing something in an extremely negative way, one of the things I've been trying to do, and I'm not the best at this, this is a thing I have to make an active effort at, but it does significantly improve my ability to make progress and enjoy making progress. What I do is if I catch myself thinking of something really negatively, if I catch myself going, oh man, I have to sit down and program today, then I try to find something about it that I am looking forward to. Or while I'm doing it, I try to find something that I do enjoy about it. And I'm not saying force yourself to. If you don't enjoy it, then don't enjoy it. Take a break. It's okay. But if I run into something where I go, oh wow, that's kind of cool, I notice that and I latch onto it a little bit, right? I go, oh, that animation is going better than I expected it to. Okay, great, cool. Fly with that. Keep going on that. Keep doing what is working and step away from the things that are feeling really negative or like, I don't mean step away as an ignore. I mean mentally don't put so much weight on something that is bringing you down unnecessarily. Does that make sense? Like there are times when you need to pay attention to the negative stuff, of course, but there are times when you need to step away from it and go, okay, I can work on this thing and make progress today, or I can focus on what's going wrong and not make progress. And if I have the option between moving forward and feeling good while I'm moving forward, and not moving forward and feeling bad about not moving forward, of course I'm going to choose feeling good while moving forward, right? And that's not to say it's the easiest thing in the world, right? It's difficult to be optimistic sometimes, but it is well worth practicing. So that's what I've got for you. And that's everything that I've got for you today. I have just finished my marathon recording session across the span of 2 days. When you hear this episode, I will be flying back from the other side of the country. Thank you for listening. Thank you for everything. If you get a chance, check out that demo that I posted. It's on the show notes of every episode of the show. The game is called Soot, S-U-T, and it should be playable on both Windows and Mac. There's a Google form if you want to give me feedback. It's on the itch page, the itch.io page. And you can also just message me in the Discord. You know I love that. All right. I will see you all next week. Have a good week, make some stuff, and have fun with it. I'll see you then. Bye.